As the process to hold Fauci in contempt of Congress has started this week, conservatives continue to fight amongst themselves for various reasons, but this week the big topic is what's going on with $20 burritos, and prominent liberals are considering leaving the Democrat Party as they've become extremely radical, and these people are saying that they don't want any part of it. And we'll get into why that is and why it won't actually work. My name is Ben Corriveau, and welcome to my show. All right, so this week we had quite a few things happen. We're going to start off with Fauci being held in contempt of Congress. Now, this was a vote within a Senate committee. It still needs to go, from my understanding, to the Senate floor to go for proceedings, and then it will be recommended to the Justice Department to charge him for contempt of Congress. And so right now I have this pulled up from CNN. What happens now that a Senate panel voted to hold Fauci in contempt? Democrats on the committee sought repeatedly to delay the contempt vote on Thursday, raising concerns about Paul's plan to take his referral directly to the Justice Department and the precedent that it could set. Members of this committee should move to table this resolution until we can be assured by the chairman that he will not take actions that weaken the Senate's and this committee's ability to conduct oversight in the future, said Senator Gary Peters, the top Democrat on the committee. Republicans on the panel voted down the Democrats' efforts to derail the vote. After the vote, Fauci's lawyer, David Schertler, decried it as a crude political stunt intended to punish Dr. Fauci for exercising his constitutional rights. For years, Senator Paul has proclaimed to anyone who would listen that Dr. Fauci should be prosecuted and put in prison. Dr. Fauci has committed no crime, and Senator Paul knows it, he said. Paul and other Republicans have contended that Fauci could not invoke the Fifth because he'd already received a preemptive pardon from former President Joe Biden covering COVID-era actions that the committee is investigating. Republicans have long accused Fauci of lying and misrepresenting data during the COVID response, though they've yet to present clear evidence of such an alleged cover-up. Now, this is all a blatant lie right here, and that's why I wanted to pick this so you could actually see it. They're claiming that there's no evidence of this, but as I showed you last week, even left-wing outlets reported that Fauci knowingly lied to Congress back in 2021. We've known this for at least the past 5 years, realistically longer if you've been paying any attention to politics. But that's not the story they're spinning here. And this is why it's so crazy, because they're claiming that he had this preemptive pardon because Trump was going to go after him for political reasons. That's what this is, they're saying. This is a political stunt that was supposed to be prevented by Biden's preemptive pardon. However, they're politically prosecuting him because he's using his constitutional rights, which objectively is not true. As I spoke about last week, he can't exercise his Fifth Amendment right because he is pardoned from it. So the only reason that he is intending to invoke the Fifth Amendment right here is because he would lie to Congress, which is obstruction of justice, or in this case, contempt of Congress. But let's get into what the Democrats have done back when Biden was in office. Back in 2022, we had the contempt of Congress for Steve Bannon, which is quite interesting because he realistically shouldn't have been charged. And let's get into this. This is from CBS News. DOJ asks to dismiss Steve Bannon criminal charges. Bannon, a media personality and former White House chief strategist, was convicted of contempt of Congress after he declined to comply with a subpoena from the House January 6th committee panel for testimony and documents. He spent about 4 months in prison in 2024. Lawmakers on the committee had subpoenaed Bannon as part of a sweeping investigation into the events leading up to the January 6th riot, including the alleged push by President Trump and his allies to overturn the results of the election. Bannon was not formally a part of Mr. Trump's team at the time, but he was a vocal supporter of the president's efforts. In its subpoena, the committee pointed to Bannon's remarks on January 5th, 2021, that all hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Bannon did not comply with the subpoena, telling the committee the information that lawmakers wanted was subject to executive privilege, a legal doctrine that allows presidents to withhold certain information. The House, which had a Democratic majority at the time, voted to recommend charging Bannon with contempt of Congress in 2021, and the Justice Department brought charges against him soon after that. Days before his mid-2022 jury trial, Bannon's attorneys changed course and said he would be willing to testify, writing that circumstances have now changed and Mr. Trump had chosen to waive executive privilege. Bannon was still found guilty by a D.C.-based jury and sentenced to jail time. So they charged Steve Bannon, with contempt of Congress for claiming executive privilege, which it was until he found out that Trump wasn't going to be claiming executive privilege, at which point he offered to actually give them the information they subpoenaed from him, and they still decided to charge him anyways. So I don't know how that's withholding evidence when it's realistically executive privilege and therefore he has no right to share that information. But then as soon as he actually is able to share that information and he says, yes, I'm going to share it with you, you still hold him in contempt of Congress as if he were withholding information. That's not how this country should work. And that this is one of the things that they did, just one of them. And this is far worse because Fauci literally has no right to invoke the fifth here. And he's still doing it willingly. This isn't political at all. This is holding him accountable. But let's look at another political stunt the Democrats pulled during the Biden administration with the contempt of Congress for Peter Navarro. In this case, he asserted that Trump used executive privilege to protect his communications with him. So we have this from CBS News for the Peter Navarro case. Peter Navarro says Trump asserted privilege over testimony during January 6th committee investigation. But the Justice Department said there was nothing to prove that Trump even saw the January 6th subpoena, much less evidence that supports the claim that he formally shielded Navarro from testimony. The defense contended that it would have been inconceivable that Trump would grant executive privilege to all his other senior advisors who had been subpoenaed by the January 6th House Select Committee, and not to Navarro. Notably, in a separate hearing in the courtroom adjacent to the one where Navarro was testifying, federal prosecutors in Trump's prosecution revealed the former president's legal team had mounted multiple sealed court battles over assertions of executive privilege in an unsuccessful attempt to stop a number of grand jury witnesses from testifying in the special counsel's probe. Before Monday's hearing, Meta ruled that Navarro would need to show formal concrete proof during Monday's hearing that such protections had been invoked to make the privilege or immunity defense at trial. Meta also specified that any argument about testimonial immunity would only apply to the second count for which Navarro was charged, related to his refusal to testify, and the first count related to the production of relevant records would be subject only to executive privilege. The judge said he would rule on whether Navarro could use the privilege and immunity defenses at his upcoming trial in the coming days. Judge Mehta said that what made the case odd was that no one was denying that Navarro believed that he had executive privilege. Again, in this instance, he seemingly had executive privilege, and they said that he couldn't prove it. Well, he had a phone call, and I have to say, from my point of view, I'm surprised that Trump and his legal team wouldn't come to his defense, or as far as I'm aware, based on the information I've seen, they didn't, which is truly unfortunate because he was sent to prison for this when in all cases it seemed like he had executive privileges. He just could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that was actually the case because he didn't have a transcript of the phone call. I mean, that's absurd. It's not unreasonable to assume that he did actually have executive privilege here. It's not beyond reasonable doubt to assume that he did have executive privilege here because not only does he have the phone call, he was one of Trump's senior advisors, and he literally is the only one that somehow doesn't have executive privilege. It just doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, they charged him with that. And the reason I bring this up is because it's less clear-cut than the Bannon case. But in both of these instances, this is clearly political. And these people were sent to prison, basically given the worst of the worst punishments that you could get for contempt of Congress because they had executive privilege, or they claimed executive privilege, which is absurd. And that's why it's just so rich to hear these leftists say that it's a political stunt by Trump and Republicans going after Fauci, who we know has lied to Congress multiple times. And we're just holding him in contempt of Congress now? It's just ridiculous. Well, we had the AP News issue a quote-unquote fact check for the claim that this week Mamdani said that you're going to need ID to go to his government-funded grocery stores. So let's actually read what they had to say. Insane. So this is from the AP. Joe Calvello and Dora Pekek, both spokespeople for Mamdani, similarly refuted the claims in X post that evening. Insane that this even needs to be said, but to be absolutely clear, New York City grocery stores will be open to everyone, Calvello wrote. There will be no system to verify identity, residency, or income, and no one will be asked to show ID to shop. This is the dumbest and fakest online news cycle I have seen. The system PAC referred to as library card-esque at last week's press conference is a customer card that would help stores manage supply and keep aspiring resellers from buying discounted items in bulk, according to Cassio Mendoza, another Mamdani spokesperson. He explained that obtaining such a card would not require ID, residency, or income verification and would be available to anyone who wants one. In a request for proposal seeking private grocery store operators to run the city-owned shops, the system is described as a voluntary, free-to-access membership card program to monitor sales activity and implement the discount programs and any associated demand management measures. it makes it clear that the cards should not be required for physical access to the stores. Now, they're saying three completely different things here, each getting progressively more absurd. First, this is absolutely absurd. This is the craziest news cycle ever. This is all fake news. This is from Mamdani spokespeople. Then they say, okay, well, it's kind of like an ID because it's like a library card. So we use it to actually make sure that you are the one who's actually doing it, because it's to keep people who are going to resell our grocery stores. That's what it is. It's to identify those people, which is still ID identification. Then not only do they say that's it's only to prevent resellers, then they go on and say, well, it's going to be a voluntary free to access membership card where it's to monitor sales activity. So who's actually purchasing what? Now, they could say that it doesn't require ID, but it is itself a form of identification. And this is the whole joke about the whole thing, because they're saying that you need some sort of identification to go to the grocery store because they need to track what you're purchasing and be able to implement demand management measures, which everybody knows is rationing, where they're going to prohibit you from purchasing more than X amount of items. But they won't do the same for voting because it's allegedly racist to tell people that they need to show an ID to vote. And getting past that fact, I mean, it's just absurd because then they're claiming that it's going to be a voluntary membership card. Well, I'm interested to see how that plays out, whether that is truly voluntary, and if it is voluntary, is this going to be voluntary in that you need to, I know they say here that it will not be required for physical access to the stores, but will be required to purchase items at the stores? Because physical access to the stores does not mean that you have the ability to purchase the items at the stores. So that's a serious question to ask. This is the modern left. They claim all these things that they're going to do, and they have no logical backing behind them, because I've explained this before. The economic illiteracy that goes into drafting a policy like this, and they're still getting away with it with people supporting them. And it's not difficult to see why, because Americans feel like their dollar is not going nearly as far as it used to. And perhaps the best instance that we can see of this is the debates going on amongst the online right about $20 burritos. In this week's American Standard segment, we're going to be talking about the $20 burritos. Now, this all started with Matt Walsh. He was talking about grocery prices being too high, which I agree with. I think that just about anybody who actually purchases groceries can understand that and agrees with it. They are absolutely too high. But Andrew Culvett jumps into this conversation and says, one of our TPUSA college students gave me his take on affordability. A burrito shouldn't cost $20. Yeah, a lot of this is a hangover from COVID and Biden-era inflation, but the lived experience is the same. It just feels like basic things cost too much. Now, this completely divided the internet, because you had some people saying that, well, if you are paying $20 for a burrito, you need to stop paying $20 for a burrito and go do something else. Essentially saying that it's your fault, which is not inherently untrue. You do have the freedom to go and buy another product that is cheaper than $20 or save your money and actually use it on something else. But they're kind of missing the point, and telling somebody that it's their fault that they're in a bad economy is not the solution, especially in politics. So we had those people. Then we also had the people who were saying that, yes, burritos shouldn't cost $20, and therefore we need to end the war in Iran. Now, I understand that the conflict in Iran does actually contribute to this, as it obviously has driven up transportation prices, and that is built into the price of these products. But I feel like they're kind of missing the point too by focusing entirely on the Iran conflict as opposed to the actual issue itself. And then the third group of people are the people who say, "Oh, I don't care about this because I don't like burritos, so therefore I'm completely out of this conversation." You can't really do that either, because if that's your position, well, you're literally just going to lose every political battle ever, because if you won't fight for a person's affordability and actually recognize the political import of this, then you will not win elections. So overall, I do think that in certain aspects, both sides are correct on this, the two serious sides in this debate, where yes, burritos and realistically every food product nowadays is getting to be extremely expensive, and this is something that the Trump administration and Republicans really need to start focusing on if they want to maintain and if they want to gain a lead for the upcoming elections, because we know that this is going to be a big election and we want to maintain that power so we don't have socialists taking over this country, socialists and people who explicitly hate America. But at the same time, the other people saying that yes, you should be more responsible with your money are 100% correct as well. And this is something that I've personally experienced because I'm obviously in Gen Z. I'm 22 years old. And a lot of the people that I know feel entitled to certain things, whether that be the coffee that they get every morning, they need to stop by Starbucks, or the Dunkin' Donuts for breakfast every morning. And all these things aren't necessarily something that you are required to have. You can cut those out of your budget if you don't have the money for them. And that's something that I feel like Gen Z does need to learn. Not everybody, but at least some of us do. But like I said before, it is absolutely crazy that prices have gotten as high as they are. And even if you want to actually like talk about this, they technically have gotten better. The average American has actually gained more purchasing power over the past 2 years in the Trump administration compared to the Biden administration. But that's not a very high bar to set, because all that we have now is prices are increasing at a rate lower than inflation as opposed to inflation or higher, which isn't much of a, that's not very good for the American public, especially since we haven't really had a good economy arguably since 2008. But realistically, this whole problem that we're experiencing now is driven mostly by what happened in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic, the Biden years, and so on. Everything after that has caused us to have a truly awful economy where it's difficult for anybody to make it, especially lower class individuals or people who are just getting into the workforce. So all in all, people need to start recognizing that, yes, there is some personal responsibility required to solve this problem, but conservatives definitely need to jump and focus on actually solving this problem, whether that be through ending the Iran conflict and actually lowering gas prices, or decreasing regulations and making it less expensive to actually open up farms and produce these products, so that way food costs actually go down, and therefore we don't have this problem going forward. But we need those proposals to actually happen in the first place in order to maintain political power and continue improving this country. Now, all that being said, obviously burritos are Mexican, and a lot of people criticize conservatives for talking about Mexican food when they don't necessarily like a lot of illegal aliens in this country. And that kind of jumps to our next position, where I believe it was either earlier today or last night, where Trump effectively ended birthright citizenship, which is a good thing, because we shouldn't be allowing literally anybody to enter our country and automatically be granted citizenship just because they were born on our ground. I mean, you could literally have somebody who comes from communist China fly over here, give birth, take their kid back to China for however many years, at least 35, and then they could run for president of the United States. How crazy would that be? But that's the system we live in because the Supreme Court failed to actually protect our right to sovereignty. Realistically, that's what it is. But Trump is fighting back. He issued I believe it's 2 executive orders that fought this, where we have this from CBS News. One order the president signed Thursday targets people who engage in commercial birth tourism by seeking to deny them access to the country. The other expands the definitions of people that it states are ineligible for birthright citizenship, such as children of foreign citizens who lobby on behalf of foreign governments. This has been something that people have talked about not only for years, but for decades. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said of birth tourism: the idea that people come here pretending to be a tourist, pretending to be a visitor, saying they want to go to Disneyland or they want to go visit a monument or go to a national park, but the real reason they're here is to have a child, to make that child an automatic citizen, leave our country, and then have a U.S. citizen child. Miller said, it gives them access under this broken system to welfare benefits, ultimately to the voting booth, and all the other rights and privileges that belong solely to Americans. One of the orders lists our several out several categories of people who it says should not be granted citizenship documents, including the children of people who engaged in a commercial transaction to ensure that the person's mother is present in the United States or a territory of the United States to give birth. Also listed are children whose parents belong to terrorist groups, children of foreign government employees, and children who are born in a U.S. territory where citizenship is not conferred by federal statute. The order does not apply to people with at least one parent who is a citizen. Now, this is great to see. I know a lot of the doomers are going to say that this is absolutely crazy because he should have he's just wasting our time because it's just going to get shot down, and therefore this isn't going to be beneficial at all. And to me, that's kind of a bad take on it, because even if it does get shut down, it's going to stop at least some of it for the period of time that it is in effect, which is a good thing. I would say that preventing some birth tourism is better than none. So all those people are going crazy over this. And while some conservatives are complaining about that, we have Democrats complaining about the Democrat Party, which is not surprising whatsoever because they have gone absolutely insane. And they've been this way for, I would say, arguably the past decade, maybe even a little bit before that with Obama, but they were more quiet about it. It was truly the past decade where they were outspoken about their radicalism. And so first up, we have Bill Maher, who we've talked about in the past. He has said that his vote is in play, and he continued to push on that narrative where he had this clip.
General Donald Trump has told 1 trillion lies, but when he says the Democratic Socialists of America are actually communist, that's not one of them. And it's not hard to prove it just by quoting the DSA and their candidates. It gives me no pleasure to have to do this. I'd much rather keep going the good vibes from my summer vacation. I had an awesome one, by the way. I totally got a girlfriend at Bible camp. However, right before we left, Vice President J.D. Vance was on the show, and I told him that if the Democratic Party keeps going in the direction of the DSA, my vote was in play. And all I heard all vacation was, oh my God, you're a Republican now. No, that's not what I said. I said in play. And here's why. Because not a week goes by where I don't read about some newly chosen, exciting new face in the Democratic Party. And then when that face opens its mouth, the Communist Manifesto or some other crazy comes out. Again, let's just read the quotes. The DSA platform says you work as much as you are able and no more than needed. If that was any closer to Karl Marx's dictum, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, they'd be sued for plagiarism. Not to leave any doubt, New York Mayor Mamdani once tweeted Karl Marx's words exactly. They're not trying to hide it. Their most popular influencer, Hassan Piker, thinks communism is so groovy. He laments the fall of the two of the most murderous regimes in history, the Soviet Union and Chairman Mao's China. Mamdani's aide, his top aide, Sia Weaver, said, if you don't believe in the government's sacred right to seize property, it's over, and impoverish the white middle class. What? That's a goal?
So you can hear him there. He's explicitly talking about all the problems that he has with the Democrat Party, where they're going too radical. They're explicitly calling for socialism in America, which he obviously doesn't stand for, and I know Americans should, but unfortunately some of us do. And so he's ripping them for that. Then we have James Carville, who is a lead Democrat strategist. He's also spoken some absolutely incredibly insane things and radical things. And he is saying that he might leave the party if Hassan Piker becomes a force in the Democratic Party, which is incredibly interesting because Hassan Piker is already one of the top people in the Democrat Party because he's going around the country campaigning for these people. He's incredibly popular. He's one of the lead left-wing streamers right now. He is almost the face of the party. And James Carville says that if he becomes the face of the Democrat Party, he's leaving because he has no intention of ever being in the same political party with that guy. Now, I think that overwhelming majority of Democrats agree with me, but this idea that we're going to seize the means of production and this, just go look at the DSA platform, he continued, referring to the Democratic Socialists of America. Now, this is just absurd because, again, he has said some pretty crazy and radical things. At least he's coming around to the fact that these people are too radical. But I have one more that I want to get to, and this is kind of old news, but Senator John Fetterman, he's a Democrat in Pennsylvania, he has said that he would leave the Democrat Party. But the only reason that he would leave the Democrat Party, is if it officially becomes the anti-Israel party, which to me is crazy because we live in the U.S. He's an American senator. Regardless of your feelings on Israel, I don't understand how a political party's position on Israel should impact your political affiliation whatsoever, especially in America, because we should be standing for America and Americans first and foremost, as opposed to other nations, regardless of what other nation that is. But all these three people have the same thing in common. They're all liberals who have, at one point or another, pushed radical policies, radical left-wing policies, but they're claiming that now the party is going too far to the left. But what they don't recognize is that these radicals that they are currently criticizing and complaining about are actually the logical conclusion to the ideas that these people have pursued. For example, if you want to look at the whole feminism debate, because that's been a huge topic for the left since its foundation, feminism started out as the concept that men and women are inherently the same and there is no difference between them. This then leads to the conclusion that marriage can become a man and a man or a woman and a woman because they are interchangeable. Now, obviously, all this is false because men are different from women, and it's good that we're different. We actually need both the masculine and the feminine to have a constructive society, but that's not what they preach. They preach feminism. They say that men and women are basically the same. There's no difference between them. Then you get gay marriage. You also get transgenderism. You get all the radical ideology that we see going around for all the LGBTQ stuff. And even if you want to take a look at just that, we have gay marriage, where they said, oh, we just want the right to be happy in our homes, and therefore we should be granted that right. Well, we did that, and at the time, conservatives were warning about the slippery slope, where it wouldn't just stop there. Well, it didn't, because conservatives were actually correct about that, as they typically are, and instead of just staying in their private homes, then it became pride parades. We needed to have pride parades where all the gay people and the LGBTQ, or at this point it was just the LG and potentially the B in some instances, they would celebrate themselves, but we had these public pride parades. Then we get into the transgenderism movement, where a man can become a woman, which is obviously false. We know this scientifically, but this is what happens. And then they start showing this to kids. They start inviting kids to drag queen story hours. They teach sodomy in schools. Now, these are all the logical conclusions of their positions, because every single one of their positions boils down to the same thing. The idea that Christianity, which is the foundation of the West, created all this beauty and splendor and everything, and that we can still achieve all that while taking out the Christianity. And that's objectively not false, because you need to understand that the biblical principles are what actually created the society. That's what created the Western world. That's why we knew that men and women were different, and that was a good thing, that we talked about masculine and feminine and the importance of both. That's why why feminism was so radical. And you can track this trend through left-wing ideology throughout history, since its origins with the French Revolution, where they literally sought to destroy the Catholic Church and kill anybody who was of the faith. But they want to continue holding on to these ideals, but they don't want the logical conclusions of it. And that's just completely backwards. And that's I don't think that they realize this. It's not possible to go back to the liberalism of the past 20 to 30 years without seeing the same consequences in the next 20 to 30 years. And that's what these people don't realize. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize that, because liberalism and, in fact, all ideologies have a logical path of construction that they follow in terms of their ideology. And in terms of liberalism, it's consistently seeking to progress and destroy what exists, and that's not always a good thing. In fact, it's often a bad thing, which is why we should be focusing more on conservatism. Now, while a lot of the prominent liberals are abandoning the Democrat Party, but they're not abandoning the ideals that led to them to the situation that they're in now, we had another horrific shooting this weekend. Luckily, it was only 3 people killed. There were several injured and 3 people dead. The shooter did end up killing himself afterwards. Just absolutely horrific that we continue to see these shootings. So please keep all the victims of this shooting in your prayers, because we shouldn't be dealing with this. And another thing too is that we shouldn't be subjected to this and not be able to defend ourselves, as is the case in many, many places across the country, especially when it comes to Democrat districts, because if we're going to live in a country, you ought to at least have the right to defend yourself, especially when it takes police officers time to get there. And luckily, this shooting was potentially stopped before it could have gotten worse, and realistically was, in terms of what everybody has been saying about this, where there was actually a civilian and an off-duty officer who were both concealed carrying, and they ended up jumping into action during the shooting and saving people by firing back at the individual who was committing the shooting. We have this from the Daily Mail. Civilian who shot back at In-N-Out gunman reveals how he began self-defense training 5 years ago after another tragic shooting as cops praised bystanders' heroic act. Salinas was seen in now viral footage aiming at Williams. He and the trooper both jumped into action and ultimately saved the lives of others, Twin Falls Police Chief Matthew Hicks said on Sunday. We want to take a moment and commend the actions of the off-duty officer and the citizen and their heroic action to stop this incident, Hicks said during a press conference on Sunday. We believe their actions helped drive the suspect away from the scene, preventing further casualties. Now, a lot of people are hiding that part of the story because they don't want the whole Second Amendment people to say, well, this is why we need to have our guns. We need to be able to defend ourselves. And in fact, I'm surprised that certain media outlets actually covered this, because we had ABC actually interview the man himself. A lot of other companies did downplay it, but overall, I was surprised by the fair neutrality of the reporting on it. There were, like I said, the Daily Mail was one of the few that actually reported on the actual representation of him as a hero. But another thing that I saw, because I don't do any internet on Sundays, so I don't get to see any news or anything like that. And I woke up on Monday and I saw this story, and the first thing I saw about it was that people were complaining about this citizen and the off-duty cop because he was allegedly endangering civilians. Now, this is obviously absurd, because if you have somebody shooting at people trying to kill them, it's better to have somebody shooting back at that person and attempting to stop them from killing people than nobody. Because typically, the only way to stop somebody from killing another person is by using force, potentially lethal, not always lethal, but potentially lethal, to stop them from committing that action. So these people are just absolutely insane, and I feel like this just goes to show how crazy some people are against guns, there's absolutely no reason to be that anti-gun. But these people are definitely going to be crying for quite a bit, because this week we also had some news come out of a lawsuit that the Gun Owners of America and several other states and different companies actually participated in against the National Firearms Act, where it resulted in favor of Gun Owners of America and these plaintiffs, because the National Firearms Act is officially unconstitutional, as they have a $0 tax, which isn't really a tax, because if it's $0, you aren't gaining any revenue from it. And as that was the original basis for the NFA, the National Firearms Act, it has been deemed unconstitutional. Now, this unfortunately doesn't technically end the NFA. There is an injunction placed on it, but that injunction has been stayed for 7 days in order to allow the DOJ to actually go and file an appeal, just in case they want to do that. I'm hoping that they do so we can hopefully get this to the Supreme Court and they can decide on it. But if not, then all the plaintiffs in this case and any customers of those plaintiffs will be able to purchase NFA-regulated items. And I should specify, only the NFA-regulated items that have a $0 tax stamp on them, you will be able to purchase those without filing the necessary additional paperwork, the Form 1 and the Form 4, that are required for NFA items, which is huge for Second Amendment rights. And that's great because a lot of people that I talk to, obviously I'm a huge defender of the Second Amendment. A lot of people I talked to said that this would take 5 to 10 years, and it's happening now, just like this assault weapons ban case is being heard by the Supreme Court. So I'm hoping that in the next year we could say that we pretty much have all of our Second Amendment rights restored, which would be great. There's still a few things that I'd like to see resolved, but we'll see how that goes, and hopefully some cases will be taken up by the Supreme Court next term as well that actually resolve those problems. Now, I know that politics can get quite downing and devastating, seeing the world as divided as it is, hearing all the bad news, but I try to every week end on a good note, and this week we have a moment of kindness, and this is kind of a story of something bad happening to somebody and then some people coming together to actually fix this problem. Now, this actually happened in Rhode Island, which is fairly close to where I am because I live up in New England. So this is great to hear. We actually had a woman who she started a business. It was a farm stand she had on the side of the road, and she had just opened it up. She was making some money off of it, and then somebody came and stole her stand from her. And obviously, this was I'm not entirely certain if it was devastating or not, but it was at least not a good thing to happen to this woman because she put in the time and effort to do that. She was selling her products at the farm stand, and they just came and stole it from her. Well, luckily, a father and son ended up seeing this, and they decided they were going to build her a new farm stand that she could use. So they built it for her, gave it to her for free, and I believe it was for free, and it's been completely put up, and she's now back in business. And these people were complete strangers, and it's good to see people still doing kind acts like this, especially for people who they don't know whatsoever. They saw her, they saw that she needed help, and so they decided that they would do it for her. They would rebuild her a new stand, and it's just great to see. Hopefully we can see more of that in the world, especially with how divided it is. It's nice to see people coming together like this. And that's all that I have for you this week. So I don't make any money off of this or anything. So if you could please like and subscribe, share the show around with people that you know, I would be greatly appreciative of that. And that's all. So I hope you have a good week. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next week on The Ben Corriveau Show.